All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to our night panel. If you don't know, I am Dr. Joshua Dickhouse. I'm the director of the Charlie Steiner School of Sports Communication here at Bradley. We're thrilled to have, of course, Mr. Charlie Steiner with us, Mr. Bob Lee with us as well, and Mr. Jim Miller will serve as our moderator. Okay, and so they're going to start the conversation. At some point, you will be allowed to ask questions, and we encourage you to do so. So without further ado, we welcome these three. Thank you very much for being here.
And I just want to say just a quick word or two. One, Jim Miller is truly a best-selling author. What he writes about big stuff that only involve initials. ESPN, CAA, SNL, what else have I?
HBO.
HBO.
And he's got an SOP.
To be determined. We first met Jim when he did the ESPN book. And it was, if you want to know about the history of ESPN, that is the book. And I, in his research, we probably spent about 13 hours together over many weeks.
We call that tennis, Jim.
The Giants win the pennant? Oh,
No.
And Bob, of course, I was his co-anchor. We worked together for 14 years, 12 doing Sports Center, and of those 12, 7 of those years was with Robin Roberts. They are both friends, and they're clearly well respected in their endeavors, and I'm so thankful that both are here. And now I'm going to hush up, and Jim, the great interviewer that he is, who knows more about this stuff than we do, is yours.
Oh, well, thank you for that. Those kind words, and thanks for having me. We're going to probably talk for a little while and then make sure that we have time for questions, and we can challenge these two fine men with your questions afterwards. I wanted to start with ESPN, though. It sounds fairly obvious. Both of you have perspectives on other things going on in the world of media, but media notwithstanding, I think it'll be fun to talk ESPN. And I want to start with a very basic question, which is, can you share with us both how you arrived at ESPN, where, and what were those early days like for both of you?
All right, I interviewed for a job at ESPN exactly 2 weeks to the day before ESPN signed out in 1979. So this is late August of '79. I was working in a local cable system in North Jersey. I had sent them a tape. They called, went up there for an interview, and I'm walking, having spoken with Scotty Connell, major executive at NBC, walking to the door, having spoken to him, things seemed to go well. And he's essentially telling me I have the job as we're walking out. He's got his arm around me. He said, "Well, Mr. Connell, I have a job interview tomorrow," and I did. I had a job interview the next day at New Jersey Public Television. And so things went well there. I had 2 job offers in 2 days and 18 hours to make up my mind. I could have stayed in New Jersey where I was. I would have been on the air in New York and Philly at the age of 24. The money was virtually identical. But I was coming out of a situation where we had built something out of nothing. I was hired at this local cable system across the blueprints of the remote truck, and we turned it into a national award-winning operation. And there was that attraction of the empty palette. You could write your own rules, not a lot of management, thank God. And so I went that way. But for 18 hours, I had to mull it over, and it seemed to have worked out.
You were there for how many years?
Just short of 40 years.
That sounds
And we have a pension, which, it's kind of like, we're dinosaurs in that regard, in so many ways. But yeah, I spent 40 years there, and it made lifelong friendships, and this guy among them. And whether it's 5 years or 5 months or 5 weeks since I've seen someone from the old days you get together, it's like you pick up right where you left off. It's that shared experience that you have, that you know that is so rare. And we get together in various clutches of people to share those stories. And now we're sharing pictures of our grandkids. It used to be we were wondering if the paychecks would clear back in 1982.
Charlie, this was after, you came to ESPN after you were Keith Olbermann's boss.
Yes. When I came to school here, I always wanted to be on the radio, and some of you probably have heard enough about how I always wanted to be the Dodgers announcer, and yes, it all worked out. And basically, in the 10 years after I arrived in Peoria, I worked locally here, then a radio station in Davenport, Iowa, and then New Haven. And in New Haven, at the age of 22 or 23, about a month after I arrived, I was named the news director. I was the youngest guy on the staff, and I was suddenly inherited a staff of 14 people. Talk about being in over your head. But things seemed to work out pretty well. From there, I went to Hartford, which was the state capital. And I thought, well, okay, that's a good step up. And in a short period of time after that, they changed format from top 40 to all news. And so now I'm running an all news station at the age of, 25. Was there for 3.5 years, and to Cleveland for 1.5 years, and then 10 years in New York. Now, when I arrived in New York, I worked at a top 40 station in the morning with a fellow named Jay Thomas, terrific talent, died entirely too soon. You may remember him from Mork and Mindy and Cheers. And so from there, I was able to hook on to the AM station, WOR, which was the #1 station in New York, and I did the morning sports there for 7 years. Went to WABC, where they offered me the Jets job after having done 3 years announcing for the New Jersey Generals in the USFL. And
Who owned them?
what's that? Who owned them?
Who owns that team?
Originally, it was an oil man named J. Walter Duncan, and then in the second year and the third year, a fellow named Donald John Trump. Him. It was hideous.
There's a documentary out about that in which we both appear.
Yes, which was fine. So then I go to WABC after he kills the USFL and the Generals, and I do the Jets for a couple of years, and the ABC loses the contract, and now for the first time in my career, I'm out on the street. That was the bad news. The good news was I still had 9 months left on my contract. Now we get to the good part. So it's in the papers, because I'd been on the air in New York for a while, that I was gone. And on a Friday in May of 1988, Steve Bornstein, who was then the president of ESPN, they were beginning to reconfigure SportsCenter. They brought in a fellow named John Walsh to run it. And Steve goes into his local liquor store in Norwalk, Connecticut on this Friday. And it's been in the papers that I'm gone, and Larry the liquor guy, Larry was the guy at the liquor store who was a fan of mine, asked Steve, how is this possible? Bornstein didn't know me from Adam because I was a radio guy in New York. He was a TV guy in Connecticut. So they were looking for new old blood. And on Monday, he goes in, tells Walsh about his encounter with Larry, the liquor guy, and they sought me out. I was one of many casualties at WABC with the format change, the selling or the losing of the rights. And Larry, the liquor guy, tips off Steve Bornstein, who then instructs John to find me, and I'd never done an ounce of television. And I go up, and they track me down. I'd gone upstate New York just to disappear. And they said, well, why don't you come over and do an audition? And I said, for what? Well, for SportsCenter. And again, ESPN was the sports cable station. It was finding its way, and Bob can historically tell you much better. Upshot of it was I went up and did an audition, and it was god-awful. And it's not false humility. It was just dreadful. But for whatever reason, they said, well, let's give him a shot. And that was how I got there, and I learned how to do TV on the fly every night, first at 2:30 in the morning Eastern time. And from there, it evolved. 3 or 4 months into it, they took me out to lunch, John Walsh and Steve Anderson, at a place, I don't know, in Bristol. They said, well, how's it going? I said, well, I'm not liking it very much. Why? I said, well, I always vowed as a kid I'd never work 9 to 5, and certainly not 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. And so I think I'm going to go home. And they said, well, and this is right around Thanksgiving. They said, well, come February the 1st, we're going to put you on the 7 o'clock show because at least you can write and you'll figure out the rest. And that's what happened. And then Bob, I can leave it there, and Bob was doing the 11 o'clock show. Keith and Dan come in. They put Bob with me at 7, and that was how our journey began. And it was a wonderful, serendipitous journey. I, again, never expected to do TV, and I did, and I learned on the fly. And that was Larry the Liquor Guy. Talk about a chance encounter.
Would you give him 5%?
I had no idea who he was.
You ever meet him?
Never did.
Never looked
did.
him up? The man changed your life.
Yes, he did.
And the least you could have done was
Here's
gone
the
in there
irony
and
of it.
bought something top shelf from him.
You mentioned Trump, and he said...
You mentioned Trump.
Well, you did.
I just brought up the question.
So Trump would always say publicly that he made my career, and I would say to him, you didn't have a thing to do with my career. Larry the Liquor Guy had a lot to do with my career, and Trump had nothing to do with it.
Well, since you brought it up,
Larry?
no, but
You're going to make liquor stores great
I
again.
want to give people a sense of the dynamic between the early show and the 11 p.m. show. So Keith and Dan are paired and become rather successful. In fact, I think ESPN garnered its first cover of TV Guide with the boys. But Keith started using this expression, welcome to the big show. And
Basically to tweak people, though, right?
Of course, because management said, please don't use that because we want you to use the brands SportsCenter and ESPN, not the big show. And of course, it was an insult to all the other editions of SportsCenter. But as soon as they asked him to not do that, he, of course, did that more, in fact, every night. What was it like for you all? Because let's give a sense of the show that you did. You don't have the benefit. It's a much harder show because Keith and Dan are at 11 o'clock, and they're doing highlights. All the games have taken place, so they're basically covering the action. You guys have to set the table. So could you start by talking about the different DNA of the sports centers, and then also what it was like when you had two kind of, well, I say this affectionately.
Approaches.
Yes, that's right.
Well, I mean, look, this 6, and then eventually, I guess it became a 6:30 show.
Right.
Had a more magazine feel, a lot more writing. You mentioned the lack of highlights on our show, which is fine. But every day you'd come in for the 10 o'clock meeting, and you had to fashion a theme, an approach, a story for the day. It was a great challenge. Some days there were hard news stories, and you went with that, and you blew as much air as you could into that. You did some interviews off of that. We had something called the cover story every day. That was a longer feature. You do an interview out of that, sort of
Like real enterprise journalism.
Exactly. It challenged your writing skills. The first 5 years we were on the air, we didn't have teleprompters. because the guys who founded the place were from NBC Sports, Chet Simmons and Scotty Connell, and out in the field doing remotes. To this day, you don't really have teleprompters for the most part. But I remember distinctly when an executive who shall remain unnamed, but you know who I'm referring to because he almost destroyed SportsCenter during his 18-month tenure, did one positive thing. He brought in teleprompters, which then allowed you to not have to just make notes for yourself and extemporize some of your remarks, but you could write compound sentences, cogent thoughts. You could develop something and have some fun with it and read it off the teleprompter in front of you. And as I've said several times in speaking today to students and other opportunities, the most important skill I think you need to bring into the industry is the ability to write, to express yourself, to develop your voice. And we had that. So with that as a basis, this 6:30 show, you could turn yourself loose. But, we were doing our thing, and we had a lot of fun with it. Late in the show, we'd have the local monitor up, and they'd switch it over to turn it into a TV. And without fail, our last commercial break would coincide with Final Jeopardy question. So Robin, when she did the show with us, would be out there, and we'd be out there as well. And the Final Jeopardy question would come up. I kicked your ass. In fact, Robin admitted as much when she co-hosted Jeopardy last year. She actually said and gave me props for that. But that's the fun we had on that show. It had deadlines, but it was not as frenetic as the 11. I had done the 11. And those hours are horrible because you go home and you're up till 3 in the morning because you're still keyed up. But I think inherent in your question, Jim, was there any tension or push-pull there? They had their show, and it was incredibly successful. And we did our show, and I had the Outside the Lines franchise beginning in 1990 to keep me busy. But it was a different animal.
Absolutely. My background primarily was news, although I always wanted to be in sports. And so when this opportunity presented itself, the 7 o'clock show was perfect for me. I don't know that I was necessarily perfect for it, because we had a chance to write every day. And we would have these editorial meetings at 10:30 in the morning for a show that would begin almost 8 hours later. And what was unique about that, we had to be at our very best at the very end of the day. And so we would sit around, I guess about 7, 8, 9 of us in a big long table with a producer and the executive producer and the director. And we would just kick around the stories of the day, and then they would put together a rundown of what stories would go first, second, third. And it was the early edition. Back when there was a newspaper, it was the early edition. The late edition would always have the scores. They were the late edition. We were the early edition. And, Bob, of course, could write. Robin can do anything.
But she had a learning curve too, right? I mean, that's one of the things that I think is so interesting about ESPN in the 80s, because as you alluded to, you didn't have TV experience and they were throwing you on the air, but there was this opportunity for people who knew how to write and understood journalism to then, I guess the feeling was that they could teach you television,
Yes.
but they couldn't teach you, they didn't have the time, the bandwidth, or the support team to teach you journalism.
That's right.
And so I think that's really admirable, because Roone Arledge certainly wasn't, other people at that time of, in sports media at that time, CBS Sports, NBC Sports, ABC Sports, you had to spend years and years and years making your way upwards. So in many ways, I mean, it was kind of noble that ESPN gave people...
When I got there, I was hardly an overnight success. I was 39 when I did my first television at ESPN. So that's 88, and I started in 67.
Clearly hired for your looks.
Well, and they actually had a meeting, I found out after I was hired, as to whether or not I was going to be able to keep my beard. seriously.
Well, I can believe that.
Yeah, and then one day Steve Anderson comes over to me and says, well, we've just had a meeting and you can keep your beard. And I wasn't aware it was even up for discussion, wasn't that big a deal one way or the other. So I guess my point is my path to ESPN was probably different than almost anybody else that they had hired, certainly to that point and perhaps since as an anchor. So I had to learn that part of it, and in the first several months when I was doing that hideous overnight show at 2:30 a.m., I'd get back home about 5 in the morning, and back when there were like videotape cassettes, I would pop it in and I would talk about it. It wasn't an ego thing. I felt like a quarterback trying to find out the game plan. I would watch every day what I was doing, how I was doing it, looking into the camera, and so on.
Were you a co-anchor on those shows?
Yeah.
That show is
Eric Clemens.
Yeah, a bear to
was it?
do. I can remember back when an unnamed executive was trying basically to make my life difficult. I would be the sole anchor on the overnight
I did
show.
a couple of
Yeah.
those too, sure.
I mean, that will turn you into a better broadcaster because it's in the middle of the summer with the baseball highlights, or if you get the shoulder season with the sports, you've got all the different sports happening. Highlight. If you develop a cough, you're in trouble. If your shot sheets are out of order, if you lose your spot in the script, you got no one to. If you're doing that show alone, I mean, I can think back to 1981. We had an 18-week stretch. We had something called SportsCenter Plus. We did 8-hour shows Saturday, Sunday. Sharon Smith, George Grand, and I did this, and it was a boot camp. That show, as tough as it might have been for you to watch that, and I would still do that. I would still watch tapes, the VHS machine when I went home, not the Betamax, but it made you better.
Yeah.
Repetition, and in increments too small to appreciate day to day. But if you go month by month, oh yeah. And it looks better.
Yeah, finally I kind of felt a comfort zone, and I knew that I was going to be on that show for a while. I didn't realize it would be 12 years, and God bless them, they kept their end of the bargain. Then Bob came along, and Bob at that point had considerably more television experience than I did. And then a few years later, Robin joined us, and it became this serendipitous journey that I had no idea when I went to Bristol in September 1st, 1988, that would be the beginning of where we are now.
As long as we're in the late 80s, Bob, I think everyone would appreciate hearing about San Francisco and the World Series, because I think what Bob's about to tell you, I think is, there are certain inflection points in the history of ESPN, and this particular night, I think it was obviously a major inflection point. I think both on a personal level for you, Bob, but also in terms of the network's growth. So you want to talk about?
It's the World Series. It's 1989. It's the Bay Series. It's the Oakland A's and the San Francisco Giants playing each other. The series opens in Oakland. The A's win the first 2 games. It was the Bash brothers before we knew that they were juicing. Canseco and McGuire, and now we're going to play at Candlestick Park. It's October 17th, 1989. It is a gorgeous day. The weather is just insanely beautiful. We're in the press seating. 5 rows from the top of the stadium, directly behind the plate. I'm sitting next to Joe Torre, who was doing analysis with us, and I forget the producer's name, but he made the fateful call later. When at 5:17, the earthquake hit. A 7.1 earthquake hit. It was centered down in Santa Cruz, but in San Francisco, everything started to shake. You heard it first, and then you felt it. Now, we're up there in that bowl, and you try and come out of your seat. It was like trying to stand on a waterbed, except it's concrete. You go, holy crap. It's an earthquake. There are 66,000 people in it. It's about an hour before the game is due to start.
By the way, I don't mean to interrupt, but for those of you who haven't seen it on YouTube or whatever, it's really worth going back to, because there's a ton of footage. Bob's great in it. And you also see, as soon as everything starts to shake, the players, family came down, the players were there, everybody was like literally scared shitless.
Yeah, it was insane. People asked me, how long did it last? And my answer was, and in truth, it was about 20 seconds, but I said, long enough to start a Hail Mary, perhaps not long enough to finish it by the time you realized it. It ended, and there was this stunned pause. You looked at all the lights around the stadium, even though it was sunny, they had the lights on, the monitors were off, you realize, oh man, what the hell's going on? Then the crowd cheered like, oh, it's a San Francisco moment. And then we all look at each other, and we said, what the hell? They're not going to play this game. We just had an earthquake. Now, this was a year before we had the Major League Baseball contract. So we did not have the right to be in a favored position with the other broadcast, and this was ABC doing the game, with the ABC vans. We were out beyond the center field fence. You couldn't even see. We had a diesel generator because there's no way they could hook us up to what they call shore power. And it was very fateful. And we looked at each other and said, we have got to get out there and figure out what just happened. So we made our way out there, and within about 18 minutes of the earthquake hitting, we were on the air. And I was on the air, and Chris Berman was there, Joe Torre. Torre, every time I see Joe, I mean, we revisit this moment, and give me a camera crew, and he's out getting sound. We were the first national pictures out of that earthquake. 66 people died in it, most of them on the East Bay, where the 880 freeway pancaked. Scores of people were killed there, dozens of people.
And also ABC didn't have power.
ABC was on shore power. In other words, utility supplied power. They had nothing.
They were the only game in town.
Yeah, we had 2 phone lines that were still functioning. I don't know how. We gave one to the San Francisco Police Department. There were no cell phones. It's 1989. And we kept one line, and we were on the air for several hours. You say it's YouTube. I've only watched, this happened how many years ago? Do the math, 30 or 27 years ago? 30. I don't watch it. I can't watch it because I remember the one time I nearly lost it on the air is when they rolled in the footage of the Bay Bridge, not the Golden Gate Bridge, but the Bay Bridge, where a section had caved in and a car had gone in. I think there were 2 or 3 fatalities as the car went in. And that's when you realized, wow, we knew nothing at this point of what had happened in Oakland with the pancaking of the freeways. And then they had blimp footage. Finally, they got the blimp back up, and you saw footage in the Marina District. If you're familiar with San Francisco, the Marina District, down on the water, it's built on reclaimed and reconstituted land. So when you get a 7.1 earthquake, it's like mud, and there were fires everywhere, natural gas leaks. But we were on the air for several, and we went back, of course, the next day. But that moment when I was proud of working with a group of people who we had no way to communicate. We were all over Candlestick Park, separated by, a quarter mile, if you will, from the truck to us upstairs. And everybody instinctively knew we have a job to do, and it has nothing to do with baseball. They all came back to the truck. We had a quick, you do this, you do that, get out there, get a camera. And instinctively, they all knew this is a big, big story. They also knew this, that we had one camera live, and there I am trying to relay what I'm being told and what I can see and what I can report. And one by one, everybody on our crew made a point of walking behind me so their wives and families could see them at home. Because at this point, every network was scrambling to get on the air, and we were it for a while.
I think also from a network perspective, the news gathering operation of ESPN took a leap that time because that's a different kind of reporting than just highlights and scores.
Let's put it in the context of the year in which it was. It's October of 1989. We had just come through the summer of 1989. You ever hear Pete Rose? You know about him, right? That was the year he was going through this
trial.
Torturous affair with baseball, being investigated, denying that. And so we had the lead. We had taken the lead reporting that story through much of the summer as well. So we had a lot of good skins up on the wall journalistically within sports. And then for this, 6 weeks after Rose was suspended, to have this, reflect on the good work of all our people. Yeah, I agree with you. It was an important statement, I think, for the ethic that infused itself with all the good people that I worked with.
In the space of just a few years, you had Pete Rose, you had the earthquake, you had the sudden death of Pete Rozelle. You had Mike Tyson. So you had Magic Johnson. And so in the space of...
Magic Johnson announcing he had AIDS.
That was 1991.
So in the space of 2, 3, 4 years, we had sports stories that were transcendental. They were not just sports stories, but they had societal impact. And we were the new kids on the block. We were the cable station who suddenly we showed with Bob and many of us that we could play with the big boys, the Tyson trial.
You also had a little exclamation point at the end of that sequence, which was OJ.
And OJ. So all of a sudden, these sports stories are now converging on what we were able to deliver, and thankfully we were able to do that. And we may have been sports people on the air, but many of us had news background. And so it became, through all of that, a marriage that worked internally and a marriage that worked with us and the viewer, and we were more than just, reading scores.
I was, when you think about those years, I want to add one more thing here I think it's important context for you all, which is the importance of Bristol, Connecticut. Being here in Peoria, you might appreciate the fact that I always thought that being in Bristol was a key success factor for ESPN. In part, there's a multitude of factors, including it wasn't union, you didn't have a lot of corporate parents coming by because no one wanted to travel all the way out there. But I also think that when you go to NBC Sports or CBS Sports, you can kind of like go across town and join another company. When you go to the middle of Connecticut, your kids start going to school there. You buy a house there. It's kind of like, you're marrying the place in a way. And one of the things that was fascinating to me was meeting people over and over again who had been there 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And I think that, when we talk about the 90s, something happened also in the middle of that decade, which I think is kind of like fun, which is when Disney buys Cap Cities ABC, they're in the cafeteria, and Michael Eisner, who was the chairman of Disney, says, and we think that ESPN is, quote, the crown jewel
Good Morning America, he
of this
said.
of this deal. And these people are sitting there in the middle of Connecticut, and even though there may have been a TV Guide article from time to time, and things were starting to get a lot more visible, could you talk about the fact that this was such an important moment, and also what it was like to be in Bristol?
The day of the announcement, Bob and I are sitting next to one another in the constantly refurbished newsroom, and basically we're in cubicles. And we are watching the announcement from Michael Eisner. And he's talking about ABC, but the crown jewel of the deal is ESPN. And we're typing, and I look at Bob, he looks at me. Huh? We had no idea. Had no idea.
We were being bought again.
Right.
Because Getty owned us, Getty Oil, when we signed on. All right, and then Getty was acquired by Texaco. Texaco, in one of the great informed industrial decisions of the 20th century, said, we don't need any non-petroleum assets. What is this thing in Connecticut going to come to? So they spun off. First, they sold a small portion to ABC. Then ABC purchased the balance of that. But there was a period in the early 80s when we almost went out of business. We were losing real money. Like
Several periods.
tens, $20, $30 million loss back when that was real money, right? And I remember being awakened in 1984 by Elaine Truskowski. Remember the truck?
Yeah.
She was the administrative assistant for the guy who ran the newsroom, and she calls me up because we were all Xeroxing resumes and getting our tapes ready because it was pretty shaky. Ted Turner was circling us. He wanted to buy us and basically just cannibalize the hardware and shut us down. And Elaine calls and wakes me up with a phone call. I'd worked the night before late. He says, "We're safe. ABC bought us. We're safe." And that was it. That was in '84, I guess. So ABC was there. Then ABC was acquired by Cap Cities, right? And Cap Cities, which had the greatest stock plan known to whenever. I mean,
Yes, they did.
It was tremendous. They treated their employees so well and decentralized. But I had been through all of these changes in ownership. It was like being on a minor league basketball team, you know? And suddenly, here they come now. And in '95, we were in the process of buying a brand new home. That morning, when Eisner made the announcement, I said, "Holy crap, we're packing at home. What's this going to mean?" Well, as it turned out, you know, it put us in the lap of Disney. But there was that marriage of cultures, though. There was Bristol and there was Burbank. And to this day, I mean, Burbank, it took a while, but Burbank it's not a battle, but Burbank has subsumed the Bristol culture.
By the way, it's worth noting, in 1990, ABC had the opportunity, and now we were talking about ABC, we're talking about Tom Murphy and his buddy Warren Buffett, the legendary investor, right, from Berkshire Hathaway in Omaha. They had the opportunity to buy the remaining 20% of ESPN because there was a private equity firm that owned that 20%, and ABC turned it down. And the Hearst Company, William Randolph Hearst, the Hearst Company, bought that 20%, and to this day, that 20% is the most significant purchase in the entire history of ESPN, of the Hearst Company. And it was amazing to me that no one understood that. I mean, if we went into a fourth grade class, you say to the kids, okay, over here, there are some companies, and they make their money through advertising, right? ABC, CBS, NBC. And over here is this little company in Connecticut. They make their money through advertising, and they also get something called cable subscription fees. Now, which company are you going to bet on? And unfortunately, Warren Buffett and Tom Murphy missed that boat, and so Hearst was able to get it. I mean, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. By the end of the next century, decade and a half, ESPN was delivering more money to Disney than anybody else. Pixar, Marvel, all those things, they were bought because of the money that ESPN brought into the Disney company.
Now understand, we were just a bunch of jamokes trying to figure out how to write and report on television. Bristol is halfway roughly between Boston and New York, 2 hours either side. Bristol is to Connecticut what Peoria is halfway between Chicago and St. Louis. So we were in this place where, and it became not only our place of employment, but a place where we all lived. And it was not obviously a very big town. It was about a half hour or so, 40 minutes to Hartford.
But they had the Whalers.
Yeah, they had the Whalers. That was the last time I was truly a fan. The Hartford Whalers, and then they moved, and there went my interest in hockey to some degree. But the point is, we had no idea. We had no idea that ESPN would be the thing that it became. I mean, the first time I thought, well, hey, this is kind of cool. We'd be on the road and covering a story somewhere, and we'd be driving on a highway, and there'd be a motel, and it would say, we have ESPN, we have HBO, as, hey, well, come stay with us at Circle 6 or the Holiday Inn, whatever it was. But as this was coming, and that day when I looked at Bob and he looked at me, and we're the crown jewel. We're in a concrete bunker in Bristol, Connecticut, and clearly they saw stuff that we had, at least I had no idea that it would evolve into what it became.
Yeah, but that geographic separation, I think, and you mentioned the benefit of basically tying people to ESPN, but also the ethic. I talked about earlier today in another discussion, the secret sauce, the workplace ethic that grew there. I mean, there was always so much work to do. I mean, you know, now it seems normal, 24-hour networks. When we first signed on in 1979, we were only 24 hours on the weekend. It was not until September 1st of 1980 did we go 24/7, 7 days a week. But there was so much to do and not nearly enough people to do it that there wasn't room for personality clashes or ego, or I don't get to do that for the most part. And that work ethic, and we had our heads down. We were in this bunker, but we had so much TV to produce, we didn't have time to reflect on, hey, that's a pretty good show we just did.
And I think also it's important contextually to mention, so these, 24/7 is, what, 8,760 hours a year.
Oh, I'm impressed with that.
So it is, but the point is, you guys didn't have the money to buy a lot of games, a lot of leagues, a lot of everything. So when 24/7 descends upon a still relatively small staff, that means that you have to do a lot of engineering and you have to use your minds to come up with stuff.
But it made us better. Because
Yes.
we had to write, and we had to create, we had to produce from nothing, every day. And the more we did it, the better we got, the more collegial we became. And, again, to this day, Bob and Robin and I are kind of like an extended family because there we were every day doing it. And not just Bob, Robin, and I, but the whole plant at Bristol was.
Before I'm keeping mindful of the time, but I do want to get to, as difficult as those days were, I personally, I loved those days. And I think that sometimes when the Lord wants to punish you or he answers your prayers, you both were there long enough to see the company change. It went from the little engine that could to a hugely successful place. I'd like to ask each of you to kind of finish off the arc of your careers and talk about why you left when you left and how different the place was when you left from when you came. Charlie, you left first, so you want to start?
Again, my goal was to announce for the Dodgers. And every stop that I made along the way, may have been an unconventional journey, was in hopes of doing precisely that. And now I'm at ESPN, and in 90, I started doing baseball. The B games is what they were called, which went into markets where the major game would be blacked out, and I'd be talking to 2 or 3 people, and with an analyst, and that was how I started to learn my craft as a play-by-play guy, and I just had to focus on that. Fortunately, in '98, ESPN Radio purchased the radio rights for Major League Baseball, and I did that, and then I said, okay, now I'm okay. This is where I want to be. I was still doing SportsCenter and boxing and the other things along the way. And the time had just come. At that point, it was 14 years, and in 2001, 9/11. Pre-9/11, I'm doing a Sunday night game in New York, and I had known Steinbrenner for many years from back when I worked in Cleveland, and I was in Brian Cashman's office, the general manager of the Yankees, who is to this day. George walks into the office and says hello and rubs my shoulders, and I look up, oh, hey, what's happening, George? And we chat for a while, and he'd seen a game a couple of days earlier, and he wanted to talk to Cashman, so I get up, and then I walk out, and as does George, and I said to Brian, they were just starting the new Yes Network, and Yes didn't even have a name yet. I said, if anything should open up, it'd be kind of neat to come home. Within the hour, Cashman comes back into my booth and said, I've got some good news and some bad news, not expecting any news. The bad news is I told George that you would be interested if there was something available, and George dressed me down, stay out of the broadcasting business, go win a World Series. Good news is he wants to hire you. Okay. Then 9/11 happens. And I did the very first game back, the Braves and the Phillies in Philadelphia. And then several days later, I did the first game back at Shea Stadium, and 3 or 4 days later, the first game back at Yankee Stadium. And post that, the last 13 games of Barry Bonds' season when he hit 73 home runs. And so now all of a sudden, I'm 9/11, post 9/11, the Bonds and the Giants make a similar offer, and so now I can actually get to where I want to be, and I take the Yankee job. My father was in ill health. He had a chance to listen to me to the end, which was very cool. 3 years after that, then the Dodgers serendipitously make me an offer. But the upshot of the short answer is 14 years was about enough. Bristol was tough. And I was able to do precisely what I set out to do. And so that's the very long and itty-bitty short of it.
So I had been there since '79, beginning in 1990. We started Outside the Lines, first as an episodic show, then a monthly show. Then it became weekly in 2000. It became daily in 2003. It became my primary focus. I was still doing sports centers primarily on Sunday morning. I was still working in the world of soccer. I had broadcast the 82 World Cup actually off monitors, the 94 World Cup in the United States. I had lived in France in 98 for the 1998 World Cup. I was the lead play-by-play announcer for ABC ESPN. Continued with the soccer in 99, the Women's World Cup, South Africa. Transformative experience covering that World Cup in 2010, 2014 Brazil. Then, of course, at that point, ESPN lost the World Cup rights, which was an issue as I was thinking about the last chapters in the parabola of my career. But what we did was, it's hard damn work. It takes a lot out of you. To do it right, the responsibility to every day be on top of the news, to be right, to be accurate, to be fair, to make sure you've got it, and to come back the next day and do it 5, 6, 7 days a week. And it was tough. And so I just basically got to the point when it got to the point now with some of the political stuff crossing over. I don't even know, maybe we can talk about that during Q&A. 2016, 2017, oh boy. I needed the break, so I took a sabbatical. I asked for a 6-month sabbatical beginning in September of 2018. And then when we came back, 2019, time to think about continuing and coming back. I had a lot of substantive discussions about how to do this, cut back a little bit, what to do. And as I got closer to actually taking that step back into the building and looking at the schedule and laying out, I said, the last 6 months were good. A lot of time with my family. I've got grandkids now. No meetings every day. No BS in your life. And inevitably, every job's got that quotient of that. And
I want to push back a little bit, though, because you said, it was very hard and it takes a lot out of you.
It does.
It does, but I still believe, having talked to you during that time, I think that there were external factors going on about where ESPN was, and that, you were still working pretty hard when you were into it. And I think, in a way, maybe I'm saying this selfishly, but I think a lot of us thought that maybe you certainly had the energy to do a couple more years, but I think that the contextual factors about how ESPN was, it seemed like that was really getting to you.
Change, the network had changed without a doubt, but it had to change. It had to evolve.
Well, could you talk just a little bit, just in case it doesn't come, the political equation? What do you mean by that? And can you explain to people how that became such a controversial engine?
It just was another overlay on the workforce, the programming, and I'm talking about beginning in, 2014, it wasn't political, but the issues with the National Football League, Ray Rice, then the social equity movement, Colin Kaepernick, 2016, 2017, President Trump calling out the NFL players, a greater voice demanded by those, your work colleagues. I always believed, and I have definite political beliefs, you should see the two of us go at it, and I guarantee you. By the way, you should have such good friends you can differ with so drastically and still remain good friends. There's a lesson for America in this friendship, I think. But my point was, respecting the fact that my Twitter account was a soapbox provided me by the company, and I don't, my political beliefs weren't as important, more important than anybody else's. But it added to the workload. It added to the things you had to wade through every day to get your job done. To avoid, even in 2022, you're avoiding stepping on different landmines in different ways. And that, it added to the workload, it added to the drag, to the fatigue.
Yeah, if I could just quickly interject, I was only there 14 years. But in doing Sports Center and then the other stuff that I did, but Sports Center in particular, our job every day, we had to know everything about every player on every team in every league every day. And after a while, it just wears your ass out. And it did. It certainly did for me. I am not nearly the sports fan that I was before being at ESPN. And I could absolutely relate to Bob. After a while, you just time out. Now whether it's going to be a 20 or a 60 or beyond, it just wears you out. But again, we wouldn't change what we did in one iota, but you reach a point where enough, and it was enough for me.
So, yeah, in July of 2019, I decided, that was, we'll just say, hey, 40 years, punctuate it and move on. But I fully recognizing that in our profession, that anchoring Sports Center is a major goal. I mean, it's, you'd be doing shows, and to us, it's just another show. You're going to do your best. I don't want to say we're not mailing it in. There's no, that's not in our DNA, but it's just, as
not
Fred
now.
Muzzy said, of all the shows I've ever done, that was one of them.
Yeah.
But then realizing somebody new would be in the shop, and to them, that's not another show. They're on bloody Sports Center, and which would make you feel good, but it also, to the contrast of where they are in their life and their career, it's a different place from where you are in your life.
But also,
it wasn't
but
that big a deal back then. We were still on our way up to being Sports Center and ESPN.
no, but Sports Center was a big deal. I mean, the problem was
In the
that
early
once,
to mid-'80s, it was still,
no, but it was, particularly for ESPN.
it
But
wasn't
the whole
part of
point is,
Americana
once
in
we
the
got
way it
our,
is now.
once we got our phones, Sports Center became almost beside the point, because I have my own Sports Center on my phone. I can get even if I'm not watching it, I get my Phillies and my Eagles scores. Unfortunately, last night I got them. But the problem became that, if you look at ESPN Sports Center now, there are you guys were like appointment television. You were in your own ways for the sports world, kind of like a Johnny Carson or a David. Keith and Dan had a very great dynamic. The two of you and Robin had a dynamic. Craig Kilborn at 2:30, Rich Eisen. It's not like that now. I guarantee. I'd like to challenge anybody in this room who does, the 6 o'clock Sports Center now, who does the noon Sports Center. It's both technology and just the way that ESPN has organized that ecosystem of Sports Center. It's almost beside the point.
Well, they had to come and watch us if they wanted to find out who won that night. Or they had to come and watch us what happened during the day while they were at work. We did not have the phone as competition. So we were a unique television show for 30 minutes, then it became an hour. Whereas now, you already know before you turn on Sports Center who won, who lost, and you've scrolled down and you've read stories. And so that's in that regard, we were fortunate we did not have the competition of the internet and the phone.
I mean, I think it's a much tougher show to do today.
Without a doubt.
Exactly, and I don't watch it a lot, but when I do, and I see my people I know who I've, remained friends with, like, wow, how do you do it? First from the repetition fatigue angle, if you've been doing it for a number of years, but also from the challenge of making it interesting. And so much of the content is National Football League because the world revolves around the National Football League. I mean, it's our secular religion. It's the lava that flows through the sports economy. So you're basically always doing an NFL pregame show for the game that'll be played next, whenever that next is.
But also, if you watch it, sometimes you don't even know who the anchors are because it's all video. It's plastered with video. You guys used to be on camera for a
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I won't name the anchors, but I was watching a show with two veteran anchors maybe 6-7 months ago, and I texted with them during commercial break. I said, "Are you guys doing the show, or are you just sitting in a booth?"
Right.
And they said, funny, we went back at our producers about this texting. We had this text conversation going. I said, you guys have a combined X years of experience out there. Your face is a currency that matters.
Not according to the company.
Just you hope that producers and coordinating producers recognize the different, as Stephen A. Smith gave a great soliloquy on the value of his particular value when we did an event at Seton Hall back in 2019. It went viral. The world is not fair. Different people are worth different amounts of money and have different values to companies. And when you're dealing with, if you have anchors working your show who are veterans, who are known multi-generationally, folks who are students here and their parents may know them, that currency matters, that face matters.
Yeah, but also...
And so you should format the show accordingly a little bit in their
Except
favor.
for one thing, which is that ESPN has now come full circle because they don't want the stars, because you have to pay them more.
You don't have to pay anybody anything in 2022, Jim.
Well,
I mean, people are, the cruel reality, local news is going through that.
well, they just spent a lot of money on I know the NFL is sui generis, but the whole point is when you pay those guys that much,
They did.
there's not enough more money
Can
left
anybody
over.
prove that it matters who announces a game? And I've done events, and you've done events, and then we do the damnedest we can to do our best game. If it's a close game, you're going to watch it. But with all due respect to the great announcers who are out there that are paid magnificently more than ever before, it ain't. I think it's a play for the ego of the executives or the imagery of the network, because I don't think it matters.
But the
At
point
the
is,
end of
though,
the day.
when you spend $100 million on Tony Romo, there isn't a lot of money left for a lot of other people. And when you spend money on Joe Buck and Troy
Well, why do you
Aikman-
spend $100 million in Tony Romo? Why do you, objectively, why do you? What are you tangibly getting out of that?
Well, I think,
You're
look,
getting Tony Romo, and he's unique. But at the end of the day, you need the internet click numbers, you need the linear television rating points.
no, you need the approval. You want to create the patina that the league wants you to have. And that's what
Because
happened at
you're
ESPN.
Kissing up to the National Football League because
Yes.
it's the most important property.
It's the crack cocaine of yes, of course.
Yeah, it is our secular religion, and they're paying the commissioners over $60 million a year. Franchises are worth approaching $8, $9, $10 billion a year.
But that's the answer. Because when ESPN had a perfectly good booth with Steve Levy and...
Who did a hell of a job.
Who
It
did a
does
hell of a job. And he was bounced as soon as they could get Troy and Joe because that pedigree or that
It's some of the
patina
finest
is
thinking though, of the 20th century. It's as if we're back with Rudy Martzke, who used to be a columnist at USA Today, still publishing his lists on Monday morning. Some of this thinking in the way money is paid out, I think, reflects some thinking from the 1990s.
Right, but it's definitely
Back
here with
when there
us.
was only so many platforms, and maybe it did matter. I've got YouTube TV on my phone. I could be watching C-SPAN right now while we're doing this, or anything else, 70 channels I've got.
Only Bob would be watching C-SPAN.
Yeah. Well, they say something's happening tonight in Palm Beach County. I don't know what.
All right,
that
let's
guy,
go to
the old
questions. I don't want
general
to
donor.
take all the time.
You could be watching C-SPAN. That's so you.
So you guys touched on a lot about kind of coming up with SportsCenter and ESPN becoming its own thing. In that same vein, at what point in your guys' career did you guys feel like you knew what you were doing? I'm about a year.
Tomorrow.
That's what we're shooting for
I'm
tomorrow.
about a year into my career, and I'm still figuring it all out. So,
But you know what? That's healthy.
Yeah.
Because the minute you think you know everything is the minute you stop trying to improve. And, I mean, he said it many years ago when he was playing for the New York Yankees. It's probably the most profound thing, and he was not given to saying profound things, that Joe DiMaggio ever said, but somebody out there there's always somebody out there that never saw me play. And I always tried to approach every day like it's my first show. But so, to get comfortable is to just, that's a trap on so many levels. So I never, you may feel the same way.
Yeah,
but like,
you just go out
you
and
got to
do the
have an
best you
edge. You don't have to be nervous. You got to have an edge every day. And after 30, 35 years of doing it, if you still have that edge, then it's still a challenge and you're doing a good job. So now, if your question is how many years before, you'd have stark raving terror that things would happen and the lights would fall from the ceiling, I think there was 4 or 5 years in, we kind of knew that, we finally, ABC had bought us, we'd be fine. But no, never get complacent.
Thank each one of you for coming. I know you're appealing to the younger generation, but since Bradley, you mentioned lawsuits, and that's what I'm going to ask you a question about a lawsuit. And it involves a Bradley athlete. His name is Harry Jacobs. And Harry Jacobs, who graduated from here in '59, and then went on to play every year in the AFL of its existence, and probably set a record that will never be broken. He and 2 other linebackers at Buffalo, they played 62 consecutive, or they started 62 consecutive games together. And Harry, in 2012, filed a lawsuit there in the Southern District of New York. And since that time, it's been transferred to Philadelphia.
It's still active after 10 years.
It's still active.
Wow. Our
And
court
I
system.
wondered if you guys were familiar with it, whether you can comment on it. What do you think about those lawsuits? Of course, it has to do with the head injuries and so forth of the players. But he did file this. Unfortunately, he passed away just last December.
Well, I mean, I've done a fair amount of reporting on this. The history of brain trauma in football, but a lot of sports. I mean, soccer has to have a reckoning with this too. But the way that the NFL was shown by a number of reporting sources to have diminished the science, and they had a league doctor in charge of their head trauma area for a while who had no expertise in the area. They were slow to come around to the right practice. So yeah, I mean, it's every football game, every football play, you've got auto accidents happening all over.
Is it fair to say, Bob, that that's probably been the most difficult story through the years of your career, that it seemed like you had many speed bumps, despite the great work that you did on the topic? It was so fraught with difficulty.
Because you're dealing with a major rights holder in the National Football League. They took issue on a number of occasions with things that were reported, our show, other shows. It's very difficult. But at the end of the day, we're at the point now where if you play football, you would have to have been on Mars to not know the risks involved. Understanding that the payoffs are worth the risk for some people. But yeah, it's the movie, Concussion. We're dealing with a league that owns a day of the week. It's one of the great lines of, you probably wish in your screenplays you'd written something that's memorable. I'm sure you have.
I'll tell you, quick aside, I was invited out to Western Pennsylvania I had heard about this high school kid. And they said, you got to go out there. And he's a quarterback. He's 10th grade. He's 6'1". He's throwing 40-yard, beautiful spirals. I could see in his head, he's doing progressions. I mean, and I talked to the coach before the game, and he said, I'm so glad you came out to see him. This is what I've waited my entire coaching career for. He's going to be a Heisman winner. He's going to be an NFL player. This is the golden ticket. And I watched him, and it was incredibly impressive. After the game, he went into the locker room. I was going to talk to him afterwards, and I sat there with his parents, and his father said to me, we're so glad you could be here for his last game. And I said, what? He said, yeah, we talked about it. We're going to tell him he can be a power forward in basketball or a starting pitcher, but we're not going to watch our kid turn into a vegetable. That's what he said to me. And that's happening more and more it's the way to look at it is really in junior high school and in high school. That's what I'm following, because more and more parents are making that decision that they don't want to put their child in harm's way.
It's the pipeline problem for the sport. It's existed for a while. It's not everywhere. It's regional in some respects, I think.
Yeah, but if you go
Functions of
backstage,
education and political leanings and.
right. I mean, if you go backstage at the NFL draft, which I do every year, I love it, but it is a sociological study because you have a lot of urban kids the NFL is their ticket. And
It's just
that's-
the way it was and continues to be in boxing. That's your ticket out.
Yeah.
And the difference is, in boxing is not nearly as popular as it once was, because kids, to get out of whatever ghetto they were in, and historically that's where boxers came from the turn of the century, last century to this one. You had to get your nose broken and your head rattled, and maybe you could make something of yourself. And football is not terribly dissimilar.
You know, Charlie and Bob, you guys talked about how everything's changing. When you guys were, starting out, everyone watched you guys for the highlights. We got a lot of young broadcasters here. Where do you think the future of broadcast is going? Because, you guys are right. I could go and check the Kentucky-Michigan State score right now. I don't got to wait until I get home. So I guess my question is, for young broadcasters, what do you think they should be getting their feet wet in? And where do you think the future of it is going exactly?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'd love to be 20 and 22 coming out, knowing that the landscape I'm looking at have so many different platforms. If I have the ability to write, I have the technical skills, I have the editorial skills that hopefully a school, a school like at Bradley here in Charlie's eponymous school would provide you. You have the ability to be your own boss, to create your own platform, to get your own voice out there. I've always said, you need to distinguish yourself out in the marketplace, but it's got to be built on all the competency in writing, fairness, accuracy, all the basics nailed down. When you have that, then you can move to the point where you're trying to create a voice. I make the point about Stephen A. Smith. Before he was Stephen A. Smith, he was a beat writer. Then he was a columnist, and he had the hell edited out of him to make him a better writer. And he's in Philadelphia covering the Sixers, and he started doing a little bit of media. But Stephen will tell you, it all started coming out of Winston-Salem College, right, is where he went. You got to pay your dues, but get the basics down. Yes, things are changing, but you have opportunities we didn't have.
Right.
When we started out, there were so few places, right?
Yeah, but writing, to me, is the key. Your ability to communicate. Many years ago, of course, Larry King was here often, and Larry was just a natural-born communicator. He just had it. And for those who want to be on the air in some fashion, and again, the landscape of communication is changing dramatically. But your ability to communicate one-on-one with whoever that person is, times 10, times 1,000, times 1,000,000, times 10 million, it's the communication skill one-on-one. And each individual has their own ability to communicate, some better than others. There's no guarantee of success. But you go out I said to somebody today, you go out, be honest, be truthful, be yourself, and then it will arrive at some place.
I would add one tiny little footnote, which is writing/storytelling, because I think that storytelling now more than ever, because you can go on Instagram, you can go on YouTube, you can go on all these platforms, and if you know how to tell a great story, and if you know how to take something that happened, I mean, obviously writing is, both Bob and Charlie have said, is important, but the ability to be a really smart and economic storyteller, I mean, it amazes me. My daughter's an influencer, and what she can do in the space of a 1-minute video on Instagram is, I mean, it's like Voltaire once said, I'm sorry this is such a long letter. If I had more time, I would have written a shorter one. I mean, the economy of storytelling, and to be able to express that in a really great way that's the platform.
It's what Hemingway did. He'd write a first draft. He would talk about a second draft, third draft, or as Red Smith said, it's real easy to write a column. You just sit in front of a typewriter until your forehead starts bleeding. Well, it takes some effort, but it's worth it.
It's the art of communication.
Question for Bob. Outside the lines, did management ever, either before or after the program, come down and say, back off, or did they always have your back?
No, they always had our back. Never, we would deal with stories involving business partners. The key to that is communication, what we're talking about, right? If you're working on a story, for example, talking National Football
The heads
League.
up.
Exactly, the heads up. There's a Berlin Wall or a Great Wall of China between the editorial side and the business side. And at the top of it's the president or the head of production or whatever. But he's the one that can deal with me and my producers, and he can also deal with programming people and the leagues. And he's the one that you tell, hey, we got the story coming up in a week. By the way, giving somebody a heads up sometimes provokes them into giving you a response. Let them know it's coming. Don't surprise them. You're not going to show them the script. But we've got a story coming about topic area of whatever, concussions or bad agents. And that's how you manage that very difficult situation. When people think, oh, you don't do stories involving business partners. That's not true. Guys like John Walsh, Steve Anderson, they had our back. George Bodenheimer, and that gets recognized. I mean, just recently, ESPN did the story about Robert Sarver, the owner of the Phoenix Suns. I mean, that story basically cost him the team. It cost him so much he made how many billion when he sold the team. Same thing with Danny Snyder. I'm having dinner a couple of nights when I get back to Florida with Don Van Natta, who did that great reporting along with Tisha Thompson and Seth Wickersham on Dan Snyder and the Washington, what are they this week? The Commodores.
Commanders.
The Commanders. The Commodores. They were a great group in the 90s and the 80s. But even now, here in 2022, with the NFL so important, the NBA extremely important, and multi-billion-dollar deals, ESPN still doing stories that involve business partners. And I don't know for a fact, but I'm pretty certain that the leagues must say, hey, there's something coming.
Yeah, so we talked about the importance of the ability to write. With the evolution of technology, would you say no matter what side of TV or radio you're going into, reporting, anchoring, play-by-play, whatever, that it's more important now than ever to be multifaceted in terms of graphics creation or even just video editing, audio editing, and obviously writing as well?
Oh, yeah.
That's so over my head.
I'll tell you one quick, I don't mean to interrupt
Go
Charlie,
on.
but that's an interesting question because 5 years ago, ESPN had layoffs. And if you think about ESPN for so many years was growing. ESPN, it's much harder on ESPN for layoffs than it is on a lot of companies because they never had them. And Bob had to go through watching a lot of important colleagues
Very
get laid
emotional.
off. It was very difficult. But the answer is that a lot of the people who were kept were people who had pivoted and understood the digital world as well as they did the linear world. And there were employees after employee that had through night courses or like, I'll take this weekend gig so I know how to do this kind of editing, or I know how to do this and whatever. And a lot of times that saved their job. And so I think that, at the end of the day, when I think about my friends who are running media companies right now, I hear them talking all the time about, who is not a prima donna? Who is going to do whatever it takes? Who can do a lot of things? Who are we paying that, we can't let them go because they know how to do so many different things. And in this kind of job market, in this kind of world, I think it's almost essential.
The more you do, the better you'll be.
Make yourself valuable, and also, you talk about not being a prima donna. The idea there are a lot of people with these suites of skill, SUITE, of editing, audio, writing on camera, editorial. But it's the collegial ones that play well in the sandbox, that volunteer, that work their ass off, that work hard. Don't matter if it's 18 hours. If you're young and you're hungry, the world will open up to you. There are still some values that matter like that.
I went to business school, and we always thought the gut class was called organizational behavior, because you're like, capital markets and financial this and all that stuff, and we thought because they were very difficult that was the most important. It turns out by far the most important class that I took at business school was organizational behavior. Because if you don't know how to get along with your colleagues, if you're going to be high maintenance, if you're so hubristic that you think that you're indispensable, we've all seen it. You get voted off the island really fast. Nobody is indispensable. I mean, whether you're Matt Lauer, you can go through the entire world of people who, were vaulted and were exceptional in their jobs and being paid a lot of money. And it turns out no one is safe, and you just need to figure out how you're going to fit into an organization.
Charles de Gaulle is reported to have said it, and if he didn't, he should have. The world, or the cemeteries, are full of indispensable men.
Yeah.
Got to play with the other kids.
Well, and that was my comment, is that someone who's grown old watching ESPN, similar ages, is that camaraderie and that bond is immensely attractive for people to watch. And I think that's what, if you can be credited for the growth of ESPN, it's that, because all the other stuff is just stuff. But it's that human factor. And watching people who are delivering these stories, and great stories, but get along with each other and look like they're friendly, they become friendly and suck you in.
I think this is such a great point, because these guys are not actors.
No.
They didn't study drama. And so when I used to watch them, and the two of these guys with Robin or whatever, you can't fake that. And so we felt like we were really watching something genuine. And we felt like it was real, and if you try and fake it, we're going to notice. And I think it's a really great point you're making.
Also Monday through Friday.
You're on so much, you'll expose yourself if it's not real.
Well, wait a minute. But we were Monday through Friday, and so, we would call it the Friday happy hour, have a great weekend, see you Monday, and now you don't know who's on the air one day to the next, one show to the next. And so there was that continuity also. So people wanted to find out what they had missed while they were working, who had won or lost later that night, and they knew that we would be there.
But I think his point is even deeper than that, Charlie. And it's like, the fact is also, there's a lot of troikas you can go through in the history of television. And I'm not just blowing smoke, guys. But the truth is that the way that the three of them operated, there's no exceptionalism. You could tell that no one was trying to be more important than the other. No one thought that they were better than the other. And that the three of them had this kind of like dynamic that, quite frankly, now I sound like an old fogey, but I miss watching that on television because, there's not a lot of it out there. And I think that what you said is absolutely right. When it's genuine and when it's raw, that's what comes across. And I think it also explains why the three of them were so close so many years afterwards. This wasn't like a gig where they had to fake it. By the way, ESPN, I don't want to get too, in the trenches, but ESPN has a great tradition of people co-anchoring shows that hate each other. And it is so much fun to watch once you know it, because you can see it. But that was never the case with these guys, which made it all the
You
more
might be out there
remarkable.
with somebody who's trying to grab the steering wheel from you, and you grab the steering wheel back a little bit, and this, that, and the other. Rarely, though, because there was so much work. But, yeah, you know, we were texting Robin just the other day. We sent her the picture of the two of us this morning. We're making plans for all of us to get together.
We were lucky. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes it's disastrous, sometimes it's profoundly indifferent, and sometimes we have established a bond that we'll take with us as long as we're traveling.
You guys have interacted with many different athletes and their personalities over your careers. So how do you go about managing, like talking with those athletes and managing their personalities and egos?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I mean,
They're
Just-
just,
yeah,
for
they're
me, they're
people.
just other people. They just happen to have an extraordinary skill, but they are not any better human being or any worse a human being. And if they're going to come off and be a dork, okay, fine, let's play.
now the question is having access to have that conversation, to establish, you know, an appreciation of somebody, because getting to somebody now is difficult because they have their own social media team.
This is not a shameless plug for my book, but I swear to God, just pick it up and just to read Charlie talk about Mike Tyson and his manager, Don King, because you'll get the answer to your question there. Because, you know, you meet a lot of egotistical, strange people, and you have to maneuver around it. And Charlie tells a series of incredibly funny stories in the book.
They're human beings.
Yeah.
You know, and some are good, some aren't. They all have skill that we're interested in, but and then you go from there.
It is astonishing, though, their talents are so unique, if we can modify that word. You know, just stand behind the batting cage and watch somebody just hit batting practice balls 500 feet, or watch them shoot, you know, to warm up, and you realize, or to break off a curveball. They're different. They know they're different. They know they're good. But on a human level, the best of them realize that and can come off of that pedestal and just be, you know, a regular person. You know, and there are those that are going to stay up on that pedestal.
How would it compare covering an issue like the Deshaun Watson case compared to how you covered the Pete Rose, the O.J. Simpson, and cases like that from 2022 compared to how you guys would cover incidents in the early 90s?
I think the same. You know, a story is a story, good, bad, or indifferent. And whether it's storytelling, writing, providing the scenics, I think it's the same. You know, whether it's Mike Tyson and Desiree Washington in Indianapolis, or Deshaun Watson and 1,000 masseuses, the story is the story.
It was actually 2,000. No, I'm just kidding. I think there's one point. I'm going to argue with you for a second, because I think that it's a little bit. It's vastly different now because you have social media, and you have a like almost like a gossipy press also as like a sidecar to everything that's going on. And so you have to wade through all that noise, but you also have to appreciate that there's a lot of pressure now coming on. You have to cover that part of the story that you didn't have to cover 20 years ago. I mean, when videos of Ray Rice in the elevator with his girlfriend go viral, that's something that wasn't available 20 years ago. In fact, he would have stood up and said nothing happened because there was no video
But it's still part
evidence.
of the story you are reporting. You are reporting facts involving whatever it may be, whether it's Ray Rice, who you see.
But you have to talk,
Mike
you have
Tyson,
to,
who
you have to cover the reaction that's out there now. You know, when Deshaun Watson got his suspension, you know, you have to talk about whether or not people
The
are.
reaction is part of the story, too.
Yeah, I'm just saying there's more elements to it.
Yeah, yes.
That's all.
But also, you're reporting, and reporting on the elements, reporting on the incident itself is just one of innumerable voices on this. coming through your phone. I mean, perhaps one of the benefits of Elon Musk being a horrible manager of his new acquisition is that maybe Twitter will die and go away, which would be nice, but then something in its place will rise up. But all of those countervailing opinions, whether they're valid or not, are out there. And I mean, among the more important decisions I think people make are how you set your alerts on your phone. Who do you want to invade your phone with an alert that something's in New York Times, Chicago Tribune, Washington Post? Oh, you're going to do TMZ? Okay, fine. But who do you want to hear from? It's indiscriminate for a lot of people. It's the fire hose of information. They're making not much of a differentiation between our story on Deshaun Watson and a take from somebody's blog that you suddenly want an alert from.
Right, because you can be covering the NBA, but the truth is, Bill Simmons has 6 million followers on Twitter. And you may be more keyed into what Bill is going to say about a game or a player than what ESPN is going to say, because it has become so much more democratized. And there are influential people now that are covering sports that aren't on a network, that aren't on camera. And they're doing that through their social media accounts. And,
Do they have the training for it? Are they qualified?
Right.
And so, you have to know, if you want to go into the profession, work in the media, you need to have the suite of skills and the ability to write and create. And you have to hope that the consumer is educated as well. And sometimes, that's a process.
Last question, right over here.
Guys, thanks so much. I just wanted to thank you all and confirm what I lived through the start of ESPN, and yes, my first apartments and getting my first cable TV was absolutely, we had to get ESPN. So you guys were key for us. We definitely wanted to see what was going on. That was key in the early 80s. So I thank you for that. And Jim, you made some great comments today. Couple comments. I have a 19-year-old son who decided to play football his last year in high school, and we were very disappointed with that. We didn't want to see that happen. And just for the reasons you spoke, right? And the other comment I wanted to say was spot on as a business owner, and having to make layoff decisions, having the multiple disciplinary capability kept people's jobs 100%. Right, and we only employ 100 or so people, so it's a much smaller scale, but that was definitely on point. If you have multiple capabilities, you can do multiple things, and you're a team player, and you're not a prima donna, you're going to be the one keeping on a short list as much as possible. And I just have one question on the earthquake for fun.
There's no, for fun.
What was the color of the gen set that kept you guys in line? What was the color of the gen set that kept you guys in line? Do you remember what the color of the gen set was that was running, the generator set?
Oh, the generator.
Do you remember what it was? What color?
I don't know if it was Caterpillar.
Well, yellow would have been Caterpillar, green would have been Cummins, and other colors would have been other colors.
I think it was big and it was white, and it was running on diesel.
There you go. White was the box. So it could have been any color inside.
Well, it provided us the power to tell the story, and it kept us going for several days.
Well, that's my business. We put gen sets in boxes.
That's great. Well,
thank you.
It's important stuff.
Well, thank you, Charlie and Bob. Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here.